your experience here in New York City is you got a deep experience here in New York City, whether it be sanitation or with NYCHA or even going back even further than that. You're also building yourself as a leader who gets things done. Why is it that you feel you are the correct leader to lead this city going forward as the next mayor?
That's really straightforward. Experience matters. Leadership skills matter. Running large agencies with large labor forces that are unionized is different than most other people's experiences. And you have to do it in a highly political world with high expectations from the public and from electeds, and, constant critique, but effectively be able to bring people together to either execute on legislation or services. It's not something that happens overnight.
Now, you decided to run for mayor a while back. As you've been going through the campaign here, have your intentions for why you decided to run stayed the same, or have they changed?
Oh no, they've stayed absolutely the same. And if I may say, given the vaccine rollout, the need for strong leadership and for really effective management and building strong teams is clearer than ever.
You talk about strong leadership and what's needed during these times. Currently, as we've seen for the last years, Mayor Bill de Blasio has been in charge of this, and he's been in charge of what we've been seeing over the last year. What are your thoughts on the job that he has done as the mayor here of New York City, and what would you do differently if elected?
There have been a lot of things during the pandemic that have been troubling. One example is the rollout of the schools. Clearly, you could make a plan to open schools. The Catholic schools opened effectively. The vaccine rollout has been just a series of missteps. There were challenges over the summer with how protests were handled. So that is really a lack of sort of forethought about what's coming and being able to predict what's going to come down the road, or having a team B around who's thinking about what's happening if you're in a crisis.
You mentioned the vaccine plan, and obviously that is at the forefront of everyone's mind right now as we're all trying to get as many people vaccinated as possible. You have a plan for what you would do to roll out this vaccine and make the plan better. Can you go a little bit into that?
Absolutely. One of the first pieces of it is there should have been a plan. We knew we would get a vaccine. We didn't know when, but we knew. Who should go first and who they were and how to identify them could all have been thought about over the summer into the fall. Do firefighters go before police officers? What about sewage treatment workers? What about home care attendants? All of that could have been worked out, and any information that you needed from them could have been collected beforehand. You didn't actually have to do it now, so that you could simplify the appointment process. If you're over 65, that is the only piece of information we need to give you a vaccine. We don't need to know if you are a migrant worker, which is literally what they ask people if they're in their 80s. We created a system, I did not create the system, but a system was created that's got 3 different websites, phone numbers that never get answered, all the barriers that for our most vulnerable populations, they will not surmount. Imagine if you don't speak the language. Imagine if you're not tech savvy. Imagine if you don't have broadband. You are not going to be able to get through this process.
When you describe your plan for this, it sounds like obviously you've given it a lot of thought. You have a lot of detail there. You also have a lot of experience in dealing with these sort of things, whether we go back to your time as sanitation commissioner or with NYCHA, or as even acting as the food czar here during the pandemic with everything that's going on. Can you talk a little about what you got out of those experiences that would help you be an effective mayor here in New York?
Sure. The first thing is you never know what is coming around the corner. No one predicted that Hurricane Sandy, which was technically a superstorm, would cause that much storm surge until the day or two before it occurred. It coincided with a full moon, which made it much worse. and how you would have to put together a team to go out and do assessments and start the process in a really systematic way. You move from A to B to C to D. And then once you get to a point where everyone knows the direction they're going in, it allows you to move on to the next thing. Because you don't want to stay in crisis mode for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, because you will lose the long-term agenda. And that was true during Hurricane Sandy or when there were fires. And having that experience and going through it makes it so you just get better and better at being able to build out systems that deliver service, because in emergencies, you need services. People don't have food. People don't have power. People can't go to school. You don't know how it will manifest itself, but it almost always requires that the city step in and provide a service that it hasn't done before.
Kathryn, we've seen the pandemic affect so many facets of people's lives here going forward, and a lot of people still haven't come back from the impact that it's had on them, and they're still going through it right now. One, obviously, is small businesses here in New York City. Restaurants in particular are really taking a hit. What's your plan to try to get small businesses back on their feet here in the city?
Small businesses are at the heart and soul of any neighborhood, and we miss restaurants. Prior to COVID, we ate 40% of our food in a restaurant. We need to get back to that. They could not be here in the future if we don't take care of them. We need to help them with financial assistance. We need to eliminate the bureaucracy that hampers them. We need to put in place a vacancy tax for retail, and ensure that we are supporting them in every way possible. Your lived experience is usually when you walk around the corner from your house and you go through your neighborhood. And so I want to make sure that that all comes back.
Another part of this that we're seeing that I don't know if a lot of people saw coming was the issues that we're currently seeing with like labor unions, especially up in the Bronx with, what's going on at the Hunts Point market right now, where you have people who are employed, who haven't lost their jobs, but they feel as though they deserve rather, a little bit extra money for everything that they've gone through. You have specific experience dealing with labor unions. How would you bring that forward as mayor?
Yeah, I went up to stand in support with the Teamsters 202. Over the summer, I was celebrating them. They made it so that we had food in our grocery stores and in our bodegas. They were the ones keeping it all moving. They're asking for $1 an hour. They're not asking for a huge bonus. They're asking for $1 an hour. And they suffered tremendously. Many of them got sick during COVID, or even took it home to their families. They more than deserve $1 an hour in their next contract. And working with labor unions is a partnership. At the beginning of the pandemic, we needed to sit down with our local 831 because they needed to keep working. And we didn't know whether or not COVID was spread on black bags. We were told that we didn't need to wear masks, and trying to figure out how to physically distance them was very challenging. But we sat down at the table and worked out all the protocols that needed to happen with the union, and they stayed on the job. Though the price of that was that our labor president may have been patient zero for getting all of headquarters sick, because we were seeing him all the time.
Kathryn, I want to switch gears and talk about schools, because it's something that really affects the people in the Bronx and Brooklyn specifically. As far as we talked a lot, one thing that really came to light during this pandemic is that digital divide, and the issue of giving people, putting people on remote learning is great, but if they don't have access to Wi-Fi, it doesn't really do a lot for them. How would you address that situation as mayor, and what can be done to try to make sure that we get everybody back in school once it's safe?
We did not have a good plan for how we were going to deal with remote learning. And granted, in March, that almost makes sense to me. They switched on a dime. But we had a whole summer to plan out making sure kids had access, making sure they had devices. But broadband needs to be a public good. We need to make sure it's accessible to everyone. It is proven that you need it to work, you need it to go to school, and right now you need it to get a vaccine. So I would invest in that infrastructure going forward. But in terms of the other question about getting back into the buildings, we should have been in the buildings with the littlest kids and those kids who have IEPs from the start. They should have been in 5 days a week. We know that particularly Black and Latinx folks are saying that they're 50% are not engaged or have very low attendance. And DOE may have lost track of about 2,000 kids. There's so much pressure right now on families because of the financial struggles or the illness that they are contending with. Being able to support a kid learning at home right now is very, very hard when they're little. But I think it is egregious that by September, we did not have a plan for remote learning.
And Kathryn, tying into that whole issue with, making sure that there's a, equity across, the education goes into public housing where this is a major issue. And you are very familiar with how NYCHA operates, the conditions that a lot of people are dealing with in these NYCHA complexes. It's an issue that definitely needs to be addressed by the next mayor and the next administration. How would you address it?
Yeah, you have to think of public housing as infrastructure for the city of New York. It is basically a city within a city, and it has been allowed to deteriorate to almost horrifying conditions in some developments. I am very supportive of transitioning to RAD and to Greg Russ's proposal for a housing trust to drive capital money and really fix people's apartments. I've been in apartments that have been transformed by this process, and they'll say, "Do you want to see my bathroom? Do you know that I'm having everyone over for Thanksgiving?" They are proud of where they live now in a way that many people in NYCHA just are struggling with the deterioration as we move forward. So it is not a new plan that we need. It is that we need to execute on any of the plans that we have and get money into those buildings as quickly as possible.
You've been out talking to voters. You've heard what they want, what they're looking for. What seems to be the biggest concern for voters, and how can you address that?
The biggest concern from the voters that I've been speaking to has really been having city services effectively work, whether or not that's I'm going mad with education. I can't figure out which day of the week they're even supposed to be in school, which day they're remote learning. I can't get a vaccine appointment for my grandparents. I don't feel safe now in my communities. These are all the issues that I'm hearing about, and a lot of fear about the economy. A lot of fear that we will not have the money to be able to take care of each other.
It's true. We hear that we need more money from the federal government, or at least from the state government, almost every day, whether it's in a briefing or something to that effect. Another thing we hear a lot about, and you grew up in Brooklyn. Brooklyn saw a lot of gun violence over the past summer. It was a lot, and it's continued. The violence has continued as we've seen through the pandemic. We saw a lot of issues arise with the NYPD and some of the dealing with some of the violence that we saw in the city. Those are two separate issues, but sometimes a lot of people believe it is part of dealing with the community as a whole. So how would you address gun violence and the growing violence that we've seen in the city? And secondly, how would you address any issues within the NYPD?
We need to go back and look at what had worked at driving down crime. We need to follow the data. We need to know where ShotSpotter is finding those occasions happening. It is not everywhere. I don't believe that it's random. I believe it is almost always gang related. Cops need to do what cops do, which is work with their communities, use the technology, follow the data to figure out who are the people that need to be arrested, who might be committing gun violence. Like, it also would help, the more you have a cop on a beat, the more deterrence you have. And then in terms of police reform, if that was sort of the next portion of your question, police need to treat every community as if they are guardians of that community. They need to not over-enforce on a community just because of how they look. And for those that do treat people differently based on the color of their skin, they need to be held accountable. We can't go through disciplinary trials that last for years and years and years We need to deal with it very effectively right away. When I was sanitation commissioner, it's like you put a black bag from a restaurant in the white truck and you get fired. That is a fireable offense in the Department of Sanitation. And that is, we hold on to that. We make sure that we hold people accountable because we want to celebrate the folks who do the right thing, but we want to make sure that the bad apples are not there. But it's about culture change for the NYPD. We need more implicit bias training, but we need it embedded all the way through your regular workday, not just one module at the academy. We need to make sure we're also training our sergeants and our captains in more leadership skills. How do we want them to communicate with frontline? What are they telling their patrol officers makes them a good cop? That message is really, really important, and it almost always has to come from that frontline supervision. The two other things that I would focus on is increasing the age for new recruits to 25, as well as having new recruits live within the city. I think they need to be part of our communities.
Okay, fair enough. The other issue, and I want to bring up, and this is the last of the issues I'll bring up here, is regarding the MTA and transportation in general here in New York City. How important do you feel it's going to be to not just increase and improve the transportation infrastructure that we have here in New York City going forward, not just for people's use of it, but just in general to increase the overall quality of life here in New York City?
Well, the quality of life and your economic opportunity. Imagine if your job market is just your neighborhood, except that it's not. It's wherever the subway can take you is your entire job market. So it gives you far more opportunity than you would otherwise have. I think that the subway and the bus system are absolutely critical to New York City. And I want to make sure we're doing everything to support them. And on the buses, growing our select bus routes and growing our express bus routes.
Would you put anything more into effect as far as trying to keep limiting the spread of this COVID pandemic that hasn't already been put in place?
We need to ensure that there's more mask wearing across the board, but we also need to just get the vaccine out there. We need to get our economy open. I also think it'll be safer as we get our economy open because we know this spread is happening in people's living rooms. Folks are gathering. They're just not gathering in public.
This is true. Kathryn, I got two questions for you. You did our rapid fire when you were a guest on our show, so these shouldn't surprise you, but I'm putting you on the spot. What is your favorite New York City restaurant? Do you have a favorite among all of them?
Oh, well, it's really not that hard for me because my sister owns a restaurant, so I don't really have a choice, which is called Outer Space. It's closed right now. She couldn't make it through the winter, but she's hoping to reopen in the spring.
Okay, where is that? What do they serve?
It's in Bushwick.
Oh, okay, very nice. Good to know. And what's a fun fact about you that people may not know about you just from listening to you, talk about the issues and stuff? What's something they don't know about you?
Occasionally, I like to paint really, really badly. Like, I try and paint flowers, but they don't necessarily look like flowers. So,
okay,
it's very relaxing.
Well, you're going to need things to relax you, to be relaxed if you get elected as mayor. Last question for you. Again, in June, people are voting in this primary. You're going to have to fill out up to 5 bubbles. What do you want people to know about you and remember about you when they head in to cast their vote that will ensure that you are someone that they vote for?
I'm the one who could get the policies enacted more than anyone else who's in this race, and I'll be waking up and working for them from dawn to dusk.